Carson CPA, the entity and cross-sector lines right here, Carson CPA Net and GRL STEM, which you can find on the web. These are the lines of the economy and the willing men and women looking for opportunities in companies. HR and vendor sourcing as the gatekeepers. A bridge down from a portcullis with the little lever of the wheel there, which is controlled by HR and logistics, and overseen on top here is Director of HR, Director of Logistics, who for the right people will let them in, come into the organization. There's a cutaway of a wall around the entity, and let's assume that you come into the entity, you become part of a work pool. In the work pool is data, financials, legal compliance, technology needs, and all sorts of random information about clients and vendors that comes into the entity is filtered through the staff up to the lines of management, senior management, C-level executives, then into the lines of boards and directors, then back down, and then those lines that turn into reporting come out through here, go out through the other wall, which is the reporting wall. And you could almost say this is a metaphor for technology because these could be ports and technologies. But in any event, on this line is reporting and logistics of outflowing information, going to policy, working on the audit and regs and compliance lines, working on shareholder and stakeholder value support, and information from an entity out to the economy. So again, we could simplify this again, say this is an inflow line of resources flowing in, but we're just selectively looking at the women and men that are willing applicants that like to come and work either on the sourcing lines of the staff or perhaps a management or senior level role. And with them are also other concurrent lines of data, information, reporting, clients, vendors, and a ton of other things, but this is just selectively to look at some small elements here. And we know that HR and the vendor services lines, we talked about it in another example, that there was this whole level of stuff behind the wall. So perhaps what we're trying to do here is say that they're on the wall, manning the wall, but they're not quite in the structural lines of seeing what's going on here in the business. So sometimes you have people here that are in HR and vendor sourcing points, and they're not necessarily the business leaders, the business people, the staff people understands what's happening here. And with that degree of separation, they can stand on the wall, they can see the outward line of who's outside might be able to come in, and they can see the structure lines of inside, but they're not quite seeing inside the castle. So it becomes a metaphor for a blind spot to where HR and vendor sourcing doesn't really know well enough the flow. So perhaps what we're recommending here is that HR and sourcing lines should become much more familiar with how the flow line goes internally. I don't think it happens in every space because we know that corporations do not work on training and development as much as they should. And so if you could picture, if you would, the example of someone hired purely for HR skills, purely to source someone, there's probably not a lot of resources in today's day and age to teach them how the accounting flows, to teach them how perhaps the finance flows, to teach them how regulatory compliance flows. So they may have broad general awareness of it, but this blind spot of not having cross-internal training, or at least encouraging that HR and vendor sourcing learns walkthroughs of some of these processes, leaves them in a weakened capacity to man the parapets and the underlying lines to the admission of labor resources from the economy into the entity. So they have some broad abstract guidelines they can work at, but they're not looking from inside the lines here, and that makes it very hard when you've been someone who's functioned inside these lines here, and you may be in a time where some of your connections are not in place to help in certain places you want to go to. And so what you're trying to do is communicate to this, and you might be on the outside in that case, looking here, trying to communicate here to get to here, but the person here does not see what's going on in here, and as a result they can't understand all this work you did from within a very parallel entity, doing all this work up to here, flowing out the back end and reporting and logistics to that end, to policy, to audit, to regs, to compliance, and to shareholder lines, has very much the knowledge of the internal model, which when we get down to it, certain entities don't change that much. They have a structure, they may have some differences in the capital, but when it comes to very large organizations and the SME lines of the small and medium business sized competitors, some variables may change. It goes from having all in a Fortune 500 model to the lesser functional model in SME line, where they may have elements of the business. They might do stock trading, but not bond trading or something like that. As an example, things may change, but the facts remain the same. So when you enter on this bridge and you're trying to re-enter, walk through the lines of HR and vendor sourcing, you need to communicate with someone up here who hasn't necessarily seen in here, and this becomes another fail point where non-relational databases that can't help fix the bridge from here to here are weaknesses. So I guess we take this to build the next slide and talk about this challenge a little bit, and hopefully it sparks your ideas about organizations. Our models are just here to kind of provoke thoughts about this, to get around it, and continue working it from different angles so we can get a better, more crisp picture of what we're trying to do, and to kind of flesh out different angles of it as we're going at it. So here we are to help on the GRL STEM lines, which are for CFO and project management integrated, business analyst, technology, and other aligned points to teamwork, including the important HR task force lines. D. Carson CPA, here to help in the challenges and needs in the economy and financials.